I'm Faith McDonnell from the Institute on Religion and Democracy, and thank you all for coming. I expected to see like 3 or 4 people, but now there's more chance of me getting in trouble with the things I'm going to say. Yikes. But this is called What's Going On in Sudan and South Sudan, because you have to really understand one to understand the other. You have to see them as they were as one country before, and know why South Sudan wanted to be independent and what Sudan is doing now, both to mess up South Sudan, but also the fight for freedom that's going on in Sudan as well. So like I said, there's a lot to talk about, and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can. These are representatives from both Sudans, so I wanted to show that. From the far north of Sudan down to Equatoria, almost into Uganda. So, and you have to see them together to know that there's a history together, and it's important to understand the history of a place to know the reality of what's going on. And it's important to know the politics. Even if you don't care about politics, you have to know why things are the way they are. So this is where I work, the Institute on Religion and Democracy, where I direct the International Religious Liberty Program and the Church Alliance for a New Sudan. So I've been doing that for 25 years, and I've been doing advocacy for Sudan and South Sudan for that long of a time. And we started our program, the Church Alliance for a New Sudan, because that was the vision of Dr. John Garang, who helped liberate South Sudan. A new Sudan where everyone would be equal. There would be no hierarchy of Arab Islamists and then Christians, Africans down below. But there would be a new Sudan where everyone was the same. Oops, did I? Yeah, okay. So, first a little background. How did Christianity come to Sudan? Some of you were here when I was talking before, so don't cheat and say what you heard already when I was ranting a little while ago. But was it missionaries? I mean, this is a book. A friend of mine who's from Bija land in eastern Sudan found this book for me, and he says, Faith, I have a book about the missionaries in Sudan. So he gave me this wonderful book that's like from 1908 or something. But is that how Christianity came to Sudan? You may ask. No. Remember this story from Acts 8? One of my jobs in life is to educate as many people as I can about the truth about the Ethiopian eunuch, who was not Ethiopian. But this is the story, you know it. Philip went down the road to Gaza. He met somebody who was in charge of the treasury of what the Bible now calls Queen Candace, but that was not her name. Her name was Tiye, and she was the Kandaka of Nubia. She was not the queen of the Ethiopians. Ethiopia at that time was Abyssinia. Ethiopian, the reason the Bible uses that, it just meant land of burned faces. So Sudan, also called Kush, also called Nubia, was where he came from. He worked for the Kandaka of Nubia. And I'll tell you a secret. My Nubian friends call me Kandaka, which I really love. And Philip told him about Jesus, and he went on his way rejoicing all the way back to Nubia, and 3 Christian kingdoms in Nubia was the eventual result of that, until the Islamic invasion, which, as I told the people who were here earlier, they held off for 100 years with their archers, who were called the pupil smiters, who could find the pupil of a person's eye and shoot them. So they held off until they made an agreement with the followers of Muhammad, and the agreement was not kept. The first of many agreements not to be kept. But I also want to talk about U.S. Sudan policy. When I started working on Sudan, there was only one Sudan, and I started realizing we're doing something wrong here. It was a Band-Aid approach. we were giving so much money, we were being very compassionate, we were talking about victimization, but we weren't saying who the victimizers were. We have underestimated Sudan, the North, in terms of its role in international terrorism, being really what my Sudanese friends tell me, the head of the snake. We treated genocide as a humanitarian issue when it was a global jihad issue. We had a faulty perception of Sudan's ideology. We ignored the warnings of Sudan's marginalized people. I mean, even a guy like Manute Bol, who was 7'10", who came to the State Department and said, these people are going to kill you someday. They have let Osama bin Laden into the country. And everybody was like, oh yeah, well that's just Manute. So we have ignored their warnings. Sudan is now remaking itself, and the people have warned us about that too, but hopefully God will overrule that. So, genocide 1 was the genocide in southern Sudan, and that was what they called in Sudan the Al-Mashru al-Hadari, civilization project. What they meant by that, and when you hear that term in any kind of Islamic context, civilization, it means to Arabize and Islamize the entire country. In other words, to get rid of the black African people and the Christians. So because of that, the SPLM and SPLA, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement Army, was launched to counter that. And Dr. John Garang's vision of a new Sudan came. But that was only the first of many genocides. The Nuba Mountains, if you've met Bishop Ndudu, who's here from the Nuba Mountains, talk to him about what they did. In 1992, Nuba is both Christian and Muslim, 50-50, and get along fine. Families have both Christians and Muslims, but the Khartoum regime said, you are not real Muslims, you're infidels, and declared a fatwa against them, and declared jihad against them. Genocide 3, we all know about Darfur. That was made, the only one that's been recognized by the world as a real genocide. That declaration came in September 2004, so wow, we're celebrating, or, commemorating, observing, mourning the genocide in Darfur this month, anniversary. Again, in 2011, when South Sudan got its independence, genocide started in the Nuba Mountains. And, you could say, oh, well, that's because, now all the Christians can go to South Sudan. But the truth is, once jihad is declared, it's never rescinded. And it was declared in South Sudan, too, and it has not been rescinded there either. Genocide 5 in Blue Nile State around the same time. So, you could stretch it to say it's 5, but I think it is, because the Blue Nile people are different people than the Nuba. So it's another genocide. So I want to kind of move into what's happening now. In 2017, President Obama and Samantha Power started lifting sanctions on Sudan, saying they were observing the benchmarks that we had put out for them, when really all they were doing was saying they were going to observe them and not action. We never waited for action. We just heard them say it and said, oh good, well then we're going to lift some sanctions. We didn't lift them all, but we did lift them, and it was not a good idea, because that's what was still happening in the Nuba Mountains at the time when we lifted the sanctions. Chemical weapons, aerial bombardment, scorched earth policy, still going on today. Not as much in the Nuba Mountains, but in Darfur it is. So we found out that the lobbying firm, Squire Patton Boggs, was a lobbyist for Sudan. $30,000 a month they were getting to lobby. So that's us out in front of the D.C. offices of Squire Patton Boggs, and they still lobby for Saudi Arabia, China, and I forget what else. But if you want a button that says Stop Persecuting Believers, SPB, as in Squire Patton Boggs, I have them, and you can have one. So, but now we know the good news has come about Sudan. Bashir is out. Yay! He's getting lots of money for being out, but he is out. And the protesters who got that to happen were protesting because they didn't have flour for bread, They didn't have oil. Life was starting to get uncomfortable for them. That's the people around the center, Khartoum. Actually, the Arab Sudanese. Once they started that, things started to change. All the years that the African Sudanese, the marginalized people, were trying to get help when they were being killed, it didn't change. But now it's starting to change, and we just hope that we can take advantage of that. But the marginalized people were the victims of the genocide. And there's now a new prime minister, Hamdok, who we think is pretty good, so pray for him. But the Sovereign Council that they have, because they have a Sovereign Council and a Military Council, and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo Hameti was the leader of the Janjaweed, if you remember the Janjaweed from Darfur, and also now from the Nuba Mountains, and as I said, in Libya and Central African Republic and Yemen. So there's still a lot that needs to change in Sudan, a lot. But there are good signs, and there are things that could happen that would be good if we continue to push for strong U.S. policy, not to just say everything's okay now. So, good signs. Khartoum annulled the death sentences against rebels from Darfur, signed an agreement with opposition groups, but there's still the real good opposition groups they haven't signed with yet. But the violence continues in Darfur, and the marginalized people's heroes don't have a seat in the transitional government yet. So that's a very recent, like last week, picture in Darfur of the people out protesting. And this is a wonderful political cartoon that some great guy wrote. This is Hamdok, the good guy, carrying the agreement. And this is one of the supposed opposition leaders, Sadiq al-Mahdi, who was the president or prime minister, I forget which, of Sudan years ago, and is an Islamist, but says now he's opposition. He joined the opposition just as a trick. So they've got him burning up the carpet as the guy walks, which I thought was perfect. And if we can help the world to see that when you say, oh, well, the government has to be inclusive, it shouldn't include people who committed genocide, even if it's inclusive. Okay, well, I will give anybody who wants a copy of this, because we don't have time to go through all this, but I did a presentation in D.C. at the Westminster Institute and said, these are the top 10 ways you'll know if real change comes to Sudan. So number one was no creepers like Sadiq al-Mahdi in charge of the new government. But I want to move on to South Sudan and this might be where it gets sticky for some people. People like Mary know the truth because she was there when it happened. But you've heard so many lies about South Sudan. The media continues to push a false narrative about what's happened. And just bottom line, South Sudan is a country. It's a sovereign nation. And when a rebel group attacks a sovereign nation, that nation has a right to defend itself. Even if it's in Africa. I think if what happened in South Sudan in 2013, when the so-called civil war had started somewhere other than Africa, we would not have pushed the president of that country to take back the man who started the slaughter of so many people. And you were in Bor when they came, right? When the White Army came?
I was actually in Juba when the day
the war started. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine, an American citizen from South Sudan, who's a general in the South Sudan Army, who told me what was happening, that the rebels had come and started shooting up the president's guards, or president's soldiers, when they were sleeping in their beds. That's how it started. You'll never hear that. You'll hear violence broke out. Violence erupted. Volcanoes erupt. Violence doesn't erupt. Somebody has to have started it. So that's just one thing. Okay, so this was the post. South Sudan's people are starving and fighters are blocking aid. And the South Sudan government got such demonization for blocking aid from the NGOs. Well, my friend who was over there at the time was able to go into the SPLA's office. These are all forms that give permission to NGOs to go give aid everywhere in South Sudan. They either say, we give you permission, or they say, this is a dangerous area that's controlled by the rebels. You can go in, but you go at your own risk. And the media, the NGOs, and the rebels all pushed the idea that South Sudan was stopping the people from getting aid. There were 250,000 forms that said that's not true. This is, and this is one of those forms. You can see it right here. They may go at their own risk. That's what it says. It doesn't say you can't go, we won't let you go, we want our people to starve to death. It says go at your own risk. And even when they did that, when they went at their own risk and then got in trouble because they got cornered by the rebels, the South Sudan army came and protected them and lost their own soldiers. My friend Angelos, General Angelos Agok, told me that he lost 17 men protecting these people who had to go in and then wouldn't even tell the truth about what the government of South Sudan had done for them. Again, Fox News, South Sudan's silent slaughter, Dinka massacre. That's inflaming tribal conflict to even say that when that was not true, unchecked by regional international groups. Well, the regional international groups were checking it, but they were saying lies. So they showed this picture, which is hilarious. It's supposed to be a village in South Sudan. Do you see the electric wire? There was no electricity in that village. So the media has not checked things out. Everything good, like Reverend John Choldow's wonderful school, Good Shepherd Academy, that has over 350 students from over 13 tribal groups, is being ignored by the media. The wonderful people who are trying to help their country, including the South Sudan government, and there's a peace agreement signed. This is all being ignored, and this is my opinion, but I think it's true. Some people in think tanks in D.C. and elsewhere have made their career on predicting disaster in South Sudan. So, if disaster happens, then that's good for them. That makes them look like the experts on South Sudan. But in spite of this, the South Sudanese are hopeful. I met last year the U.S. or South Sudan's new ambassador to the U.S., who's a wonderful man, Ambassador Philip Chada. And he told a story about a South Sudanese man going to an elder and saying, why are we having all these problems? What's going on? And he said that the elder held his hand like this and said to him, if you can tell me, I have a butterfly in my hand. If you can tell me whether it's alive or whether it's dead, you will understand why we're having these problems in South Sudan. And the man said, well, if I tell you that it's dead and it's alive, you'll just let it go and I'll be wrong. If I tell you it's alive, and even if it's alive, you'll just squish it and kill it, and then it will be dead, so I will be wrong. And the man said, that's the problem in South Sudan. So Ambassador Phillips said, we are doing this to ourselves in South Sudan. So, of course, I had to respond, and I said, I think that the world community is doing that to you. I think the world community is taking your hand and squishing that butterfly, and we need to pray that the truth will be revealed more and more. Another quick incident, the new foreign minister for South Sudan, Madam Awout, before she was the foreign minister, she was the Minister of Gender and Women's Issues and Health. And a story went out with all the NGOs, especially the NGOs who hate this administration, that there was gender violence and rape going on in this one part of South Sudan, terrible mass rape going on. So Madam Awout was sent to investigate. The report was coming from MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and in their clinic in that town, they had these things they called dignity kits for the women, where all the women were supposed to get these nice kits that had things in them. Well, they were adding 100 South Sudanese pounds to these kits, but only if you had been raped could you get it. So what were the women doing? They were going home, having sex with their husbands, and coming back and saying, I was raped, because they wanted this kit. And MSF was doing Depo-Provera, birth control injections without telling the women what they were doing. They were doing abortifacients in some cases, and that was what was going on. That was the real thing that was going on, and yet the world was told that the South Sudan army or young men were raping women and getting away with it. And things like that happen all the time. There's these lies. I'll tell you one more. Do I have time? Oh, I gotta quickly to finish this. But Nikki Haley, Ambassador Haley, when she went to Gambella, where the refugee camp was, she spread this story all over the world because she was so shocked. But a refugee woman, she said, told her that the army had killed her baby and burned it and forced her to eat it. And when I heard that story, I said, there's no way. There is no way that can happen. If you know anything about South Sudan culture, you know that no tribe would do that, first of all. That an army wouldn't be acting like that. They're fighting and then leaving. They're not sitting around the campfire waiting for a woman to eat her baby. And I said, I bet they got that story from ISIS, because ISIS did do that to a woman, if you remember, at one point. And they thought, this will make South Sudan look so horrible to the world. So, but I even found out later, the woman didn't even say it. It was the translator for the woman who said it. And guess who the translator was? He was a bodyguard for Riek Machar, the rebel leader. So, but nobody bothered to find out those things. So there's truth. You know, I really hate the expression deep dive, but in this case, you need a deep dive to find out what's really happening in South Sudan. Because of my kind of speech like this and wanting to know truth, I've been accused by some of the rebels of being an arms dealer for Salva Kiir, President Salva Kiir. So that's another one. If you ever think you hear something about South Sudan, think, well, could that be true? Is Faith McDonnell an arms dealer? If she's not an arms dealer, then this may not be true, too. So, and I'm not an arms dealer, I promise you. So, but in spite of this, as I said, the South Sudanese are hopeful. So I keep a journal that I've been keeping since 2016 to pray Bible verses that are promises for the future about South Sudan and Sudan. And that is the way that I keep my, sanity, hopefully. But Isaiah 51, this is what I do. And to do spiritual warfare for South Sudan. This morning we talked about the need for prayer in mission. Boy, do we have the need for prayer for the persecuted church and for issues like this, where there has been such a deception going on, both on Sudan and South Sudan. So God gave me the promise for South Sudan that about the verses that say, come and buy food with no money. And I thought, how's that going to happen? But we still have to see. It hasn't happened yet, but there's something going on. So I kind of like the God retribution on the enemy stuff. So God will shoot them with arrows, and that reminds me of those Nubian archers too, because God's got even better aim than those archers did. So, and He will turn their own tongues against them. And that has actually happened. We prayed that about some of these issues, and the groups that were against, the truth would start fighting with each other. So you can always pray that kind of thing. I think that's okay. And then pray that all mankind will proclaim God and ponder what He has done by seeing this. So, Yeah, that's Sudan and South Sudan. And if you ever want to come to D.C. and have a beer with me and hear more, you are most welcome. But I'm ready to take questions now. Yes?
What percentage of refugees have returned to South Sudan?
Not as many as should. Now, some of my South Sudan brothers could probably tell you better than me, but what I know is they have started. The government is encouraging them to come back. There are some areas, like I have a friend who is in Nimale and has a farm there where he's just growing food and has been the whole time. And if people would return to their areas, the UN has been intimidating them, really. The UN has been telling people, oh, you don't want to go back because the South Sudan government's going to kill you. If they don't listen to those lies, if they go back, South Sudan could be feeding all of Africa. South Sudan has the most organic, fertile soil. They have, 3 growing seasons a year? Yeah, they could be doing so much, and the enemy is, the enemy is keeping them from doing what God has created them to be. So hopefully there'll be more coming back, but they are leaving little by little. Some of the people who are still in refugee camps are the people who take off their opposition uniform, go into the camp and sleep at night, then put their uniform back on, pick up their weapons, and go fight against the South Sudan government. So, Mary.
Just another comment about that. One of the difficulties, and it's one of those things that when people ask what can we do, many people do not want to return because they want their children educated, and they don't see, even before the war, they did not see the education levels that the children were getting in the refugee camp. And I got to tell you, the education in the refugee camp was like 75 kids in a classroom, but they saw that as better than the other. And so there's like this reluctance to leave the dependence. Yeah. And that's a difficulty.
It is.
It has to be overcome.
It does. Education, because it's so important. And of course, John's school is helping a lot with that. And you can read his book, God's Refugee, and find out more about that too. But the infrastructure in South Sudan needs to be helped. And that's the thing, President Kiir and the government of South Sudan thought once that they were independent, they love America. And they thought that America was going to be the good uncle and keep helping them. But when Machar did what he did, it twisted everything around, and the USAID told people, don't invest in South Sudan now, don't do this, we have to wait until we get rid of Kiir, and it's horrible, it really is. So, but now there are some groups that are coming in. Yes?
Have you been following any of the theological investment? I think the Episcopal Church has been making some moves in South Sudan with seminaries and forums
Oh dear.
thing at Duke Divinity, and it's in partnership with BTS.
Yeah.
Do you know what's going on there?
Well, that's been going on a long time, and I have to say, because we Anglicans are kind of behind the curve on that. The Episcopal Church was doing that for a long time and did a lot of good too, to be honest. But yeah, they're trying to infiltrate. But I know Archbishop Daniel Deng-Bull was going to GAFCON, and that Archbishop Justin, is going to GAFCON, and hopefully we will have that. There's a great little Bible college in Juba. Reverend Samuel Mario, who trained at Trinity, has Bishop Gwynn Bible College, and you can read the testimonies of students from there online that are really wonderful too. So, somebody else have a hand? Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm called Reverend Kenon Jackson Umba from South Sudan, Juba. I think during the conflict between Sudan and South Sudan, which erupted in 1983, I was in Juba. I didn't leave Juba.
Wow.
Until the signing of comprehensive peace agreement. I remained in Juba. Wow. Until 2013 conflicts and 2016 conflicts, I was in Juba. I didn't run out from Juba. I think we are only 3 people whom didn't run out from Juba or take their wives somewhere else. Ours remain there. Just I want to add something about, I think you know our situation better than ourselves. I just wanted to say something about, gender-based violence in South Sudan. I'm speaking as a priest, not as a politician. I think when we talk of this raping and other things, these are reality. These things happen. Women raped, girls raped. We are aware about that one. Not only that, houses, as you have shown to us, were burned. And even as I'm speaking now, last week, the same thing happened in one of the state called Yei River State. And Yei River State is bordering Uganda and Congo. So that one, I think it is not the opposition, that is the army of Riek Machar, but also there is another movement that is NAS under
Thomas
Cirillo.
Yeah.
I think still Thomas Cirillo is not part of the peace agreement signed.
Yeah.
And still these things are, the war is still in the other parts is there. Coming to the issue of theological education, I think we have Bishop Wynne College, that is in Juba, and then we have Siama in Meridi, and then we have Santi John. I think is operating, that one is in Reng, it is also operating, but the one of Kajukeji is displaced to Uganda. Yeah, and then the one of Yei River also, the same, it is displaced to Uganda. But Bishop Wynne College, I think, is doing a lot in theological education, including what I think my brother John, they are also doing education theological college. And Catholic Church also, they have their seminary, and it is going on well in that regard. So I just have a question in regard to this issue of South Sudan conflict that actually erupted between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir Mayardit. I don't know. Let us look at the bigger side of it. What is the idea of other superpowers like America, like UK? Are they ready to support the implementation of the comprehensive peace that has already been signed?
I hope
because
so.
That is our hope.
Yes.
That is
Amen.
our hope. And
Amen.
also we are hearing in the media that the international community, sometimes they are not, they are reserved, to put in their resources for the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement.
Right. Well,
I don't know exactly what is behind that.
I don't know if I have it with me, but
Because the hope of the people of South Sudan is not based on those two leaders, but it is, a pressure from the superpowers.
as well as the people of
And
South
as well
Sudan.
as people of
And the
South
people
Sudan.
in South Sudan are much more hopeful and or wanting peace than some of your diaspora people who are still causing problems on the
we know
internet
that
and things
people,
like
they are
that.
causing problems.
Yeah.
You know that because they are here. They don't have any problems.
Yeah, they can just say whatever they want to
hear
say.
that the country is in chaos. But for us, as a people who are living in Juba, we have seen the hearts of our people are for peace.
Yes.
You know.
Well, what I would suggest is that the church in South Sudan do some kind of statement or letter to the United States saying, please support us, and I'll make sure it gets to the right people, because, you know, we had this big ministerial on religious freedom at the State Department last summer, the second one. No one from South Sudan was invited, and that made me very angry, because there's no religious persecution in South Sudan. That's a country that could say, we're allowing the people who killed us to have their mosques playing all night, because I've been to Samuel's house and was woken up by the mosque at all hours. So there's religious freedom in South Sudan, and it should be honored for that, and it was not. So if you will make sure that that happens, we can, and anybody who wants to support that with us. But this was, Madam Awood gave me this. This was the security arrangements that were signed between President Kiir and Riek Machar. And the U.S. needs to support these things. We need our government to start supporting them and not, not being cynical. When after the agreement was signed in August of last year, August of last year, a number of high-level government people from South Sudan came to the U.S. to a meeting at the Atlantic Council, which I would have told them not to do anyway. But there were all these think tank people there, and they were so arrogant and rude to the government of South Sudan people. They were like rolling their eyes when they talked about peace and smirking, and they would not shake hands with Taban Dengai. It was appalling. So we need to do better than that. We need to, what does Jesus say? When a bruised reed I will not break. We don't want to break the reed so we can say we were right about South Sudan. We want to help that reed to get strong. So whatever we can do, and if you want to get in touch with me at IRD, if you're interested in helping with this, we've got John's School, we've got the wonderful Episcopal Church of South Sudan, which they went through so much, they don't need to go through anymore. So, and if you know any South Sudanese diaspora people in your town, if they're putting out bad stuff about South Sudan, tell them please don't do that. Let's focus on the future and on prosperity, go get your relatives to start a little shea butter factory in South Sudan. I mean, I think that's the future. Shea butter and coffee beans. So that's what I'd like to invest in if I ever had any money. If I had the $2 million that Salva Kiir supposedly gave me for being an arms dealer. But I think we're done unless anybody has another question that you're just burning to ask. So, yeah, come over here. And
that is okay, but you teach them on what they can take back home.
Yes.
Yeah, if you
That
put
is
it that
something
way.
Whatever time that they want to go home is a good time for them.
Yeah.
And having been in the refugee camp, it's very important to have a refugee person returning in his free will, when he has that assurance, when he has that, because there are a lot of questions when you are a refugee. What do I take back home? Where do I go? Well, that trauma that came with you before.
I would say too, make sure that the aid is given directly to the churches at the refugee camps, not to the UN. Mary?
Yeah,
Good idea.
about 2 years ago, I was privileged to go to a meeting that was a gathering of young people from the refugee camps with Bishop Hilary Ding, who was the Bishop of Malakal.
Yes.
And his dream is to have more and more opportunities to go and to teach I'm sorry, I should do what he did, and to go and to teach the young people that are in the refugee camps, some of which have never had any other home. Because not formal education, they've had no other home. They literally, they are in the...
And Mary taught economics at John Garang University in Bor until it was wiped out by the rebels, so by the White Army. we will pray for you for South Sudan, but you can also represent Sudan too, and we'll pray for both. So anybody want to come up and lay hands here? Come on.